Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Emispis. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 23rd of July 2024. This is a military aid and equipment and other aid video. There's lots to go through, and my goodness, my geopolitics video is going to be pretty jam-packed as well. It's just so much going on at the moment. Okay, we'll start with good old Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, married to Anne Applebaum, if you remember. He's always so strong on Ukraine and supporting Ukraine. He has come out and said that protecting the Children's Cancer Hospital is not an escalation. Ukraine should be allowed to use Western weapons to strike Russian airfields, and that's as a result of after meeting at the EU Council. So he's again being strong on wanting the US. He says, I urge my counterparts to change the restriction of the use of long-range weapons so that Ukraine can prevent such attacks in the future by targeting military aircraft launching cruise missiles. This really needs to change, as well as the airfields they use, he says. Interesting that, and we'll talk about this in the geopolitics video, that Biden has apparently said in the remaining time he's going to have as president, no matter who takes over, he's going to concentrate on Ukraine and the Middle East. So that's really interesting, and I hope you'll see some big aid packages come. Use up the rest of that $60 billion, and try and maybe lift restrictions. Just be really strong on Ukraine and leave them in as strong a position as they can, no matter who takes over in November, January, depending on how you see it. Really, January. No matter who takes over, they will have at least the best shot at it, Ukraine, in the remaining time of his tenure. So, yeah. Okay, going on, we're going to look at finances first. So the EU and US are apparently close to agreeing a $50 billion loan for Ukraine, with each providing $20 billion. The agreement is expected to be reached at the G7 finance ministers meeting in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. The remaining $10 billion will come from the UK, Japan and Canada, so obviously not part of the EU, but allied to Ukraine and helping through the G7. The loan will be repaid using revenues from frozen Russian assets. Again, it's seemingly a good use of these frozen Russian assets. Additionally, the Ukrainian government approved the $3.9 billion grant from the US for salaries and social support, which will be channeled through the World Bank. And indeed, that we've got details of that. Where is it here? So Ukraine to attract almost 4 billion, so 3.9 billion via the World Bank in a grant for salaries and social support programs, according to Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister. On top of that, we've got Josep Borrell in the EU, soon to be replaced by Kaja Kallas, saying the first tranche of revenues from the frozen Russian assets to the amount of 1.4 billion euros will be transferred in the first week of August. It will be used to purchase weapons for Ukraine. So that's excellent news. We keep hearing end of July, beginning of August, so it seems like beginning of August, get that money, spend it on weapons. Excellent. So Ukraine is counting on the next tranche from the EU, so that'd be part of the $50 billion package, if you remember. So they're hoping to get that next 4.1 billion euros in actually 50 billion euros, I think, which is even more in dollars, already in September this year, and that was announced again by Denis Shmyhal. As well as that grant. That grant's going to be used to pay rescue workers, teachers, doctors, social support programs. Keep the government functioning. Ukraine's own gas production is increasing. We expect to get through the winter on gas from our own Ukrainian production. More than 10 billion cubic meters have already been pumped into gas storage facilities. By November, we plan to increase this volume to more than 13 billion cubic meters. Obviously, that's going to give Ukraine the ability to get through the winter and also be able to have energy to do things like still manufacture weaponry, and maybe even to support exports of hydrocarbons, which will again support the government as a whole. Hungary, though, has once again blocked EU funds used for arms procurement to Ukraine, says Pravda. It's just, there is obviously, we could predict that because Ukraine have stopped oil going to Hungary and Slovakia. So there's going to be a game of leverage here going on. And we'll see who comes out on top, won't we? Now, we're going to have a little bit of a section on drones and we'll start with Shashant Joshi from The Economist, defense correspondent, quoting from the Economist article, or sort of dipping into it. So Ukraine's new drone chief. So if you remember, there's now someone in charge of drones. Swords, quote, swords, an extensive collection of daggers and Warhammer models, which he glues together in spare evenings, completely eccentric image of a modern day Cossack hetman. So here we have the guy introduced to the guy, Vadim Sukharevsky, the man in charge of Ukraine's drones. By the time Russian drones reach the front lines, Ukraine has sometimes already developed countermeasures. Colonel Sukharevsky claims quantitatively Russia is ahead, but qualitatively we are keeping them at parity. Well, actually, I don't think that's true. I think he's being a little bit too modest there, because I think quantitatively Ukraine is ahead by, according to all metrics that we know, or all sources that we understand, sources on the front line, sources claiming, that they are producing at this level. It's only when the Russians say that that they claim to be producing as many drones as they do, that you think, oh, okay, maybe they're out producing and out procuring and out providing the Ukrainians in drones to the front line. But I don't believe that, and actually there's no evidence to support that. So I think both qualitatively and quantitatively the Ukrainians are ahead, but he's concentrating here on qualitatively. He says we're keeping them at parity, but there's been lots of reports I've been dipping into recently, and I think he's playing his cards close to the chest here. But I think, qualitatively, the Russians are at a disadvantage with what Ukrainians can do with their drones, both in terms of the training of the pilots and the expertise of the pilots, and their ability to tackle electronic warfare. As we heard this morning in my hits and losses video, there was an anecdote from a Russian saying, our stuff is out of date and it's crap and blah blah blah. I just think that there are both elements of the equation there sit in favor of the Ukrainians. But anyway, Colonel Sukharevsky says drones will not overturn the fundamental principles of warfare. The primary role of artillery or infantry are undiminished. He says military operations still depend on combined arms. Absolutely. As a commander, I will never relinquish a bulk of decision making to artificial intelligence. In the distant future, we need such a decision. We'll look at it carefully, but you don't need AI to create swarms. Interesting. Okay, now talking of drones, Latvia sent a batch of over 500 drones to Ukraine. So this is where we're talking about that quantitative element of drone activity in Ukraine. On the 5th of July, the Ministry of Defense of Latvia, Andris Spruds, announced that more than 2,500 combat drones of various types worth €4 million will be delivered to Ukraine. The first batch of 300 drones arrived a few days after the announcement. The rest should arrive within the month. So great news there. Czechia is joining the International Drone Coalition to boost Ukraine's arsenal. Czechia joined the drone coalition led by Latvia and the UK. So we just heard from Latvia there after its delegation signed a memorandum of understanding during the NATO summit in Washington, according to the Latvian Defense Ministry. Ukraine's cheap sensors are helping troops fight off waves of Russian drones, thanks to someone for highlighting this Ukrainian achievement, says Samuel Bender, referring to the Defense Zone article that I referred to earlier in my first video. So the idea is that there are these $400 to $500 acoustic sensors set up around Ukraine, just to remind you, or just because some of you won't have seen that first video. And so sometimes they can be like mobile phones attached to like a simple mast, and that's listening. So listening out for the sound of drones, and you get those set out across Ukraine, and you get computer listening to that, then you are very cheaply getting an audio understanding of whether drones are attacking. So, you've got the curvature of the earth, and that might struggle with very low flying drones, right? So it's really difficult to spot drones until they basically hit the target or very close to the target. So what you need are a network of acoustic sensors, which they've got, and that is allowing them to then, each of these mobile fire groups, whether that be a Geopol or a ZSU, whatever, on the back of a truck or whatever it be, they have an iPad, and they're getting data fed to them about where drones might be, and then they're driving out and taking them down. And so you're seeing a much improved interception rate of drones, and it comes down to these cheap sensors set up around Ukraine. So that's really good news, because it's about getting it, as the thread I shared with you earlier discussed, it's about getting on the right side of the cost curve. So this is a very cheap way, rather than sending Patriot missiles to shoot down drones, Shahed drones. This is just completely ridiculous, and that's cost asymmetrical. So you need to be able to take out drones more cheaply than they cost. So these drones might be whatever. I mean, there were claims that they were $20,000 worth of drones, the Iranian drones, but actually subsequent intel showed that they would cost an awful lot more than that. So I forget what the numbers were, whether I don't know, 40,000 to 140,000, I don't know. So I'll be making up, but they started off thinking, the Ukrainians started off thinking that the Russians are paying this for these attack drones, but actually it's more. But still, if your missile cost $1 million per a pop, and you're sending that against something that cost $100,000 a pop, then you are losing that game, because they can send you 100 drones and you're firing 100 missiles, and suddenly you're out of pocket to the tune of gazillions, right? So you need to be shooting down those drones cheaper than it costs for those drones to be sent to you, and that is now what is happening, which is really good news, or at least it'll be approaching that. I mean, it depends how you cost all these things up overall. Right, Boeing and Ukrainian company Antonov, so the manufacturer of those big airplanes, signed an agreement on cooperation in the field of drones, according to the website of the American aircraft manufacturer. Areas of potential cooperation include training, logistical support, and overhaul services of tactical drones, aerial drones, used by the armed forces. Joint projects in the aerospace and defense industry are possible in the future. So good cooperation there, which will be to the benefit, of course, like I've said to you many times, of the Americans in this case. So Boeing will be taking information from the battlefield that will be super useful in their R&D. They'll also be helping design and manufacture stuff for the Ukrainians. They'll be making money out of that themselves. But the benefit they can bring back, that knowledge they can bring back to the US to improve the US's chances of having effective drone capabilities for their own military going forward will be super useful. Bulgaria has found what we're going to do first is so I talked to you, I've mentioned this thread now a couple of times. I mentioned it yesterday, didn't I? So this is Andrew Perpetua saying, look, Ukraine still has a shortage of artillery ammo. You've got these YOLO attacks that are going like a couple of kilometers of a few BMPs packed full of people driving, getting through minefields because the mines have already been blown up, getting a couple of kilometers and then eventually getting blown up, but they should have been blown up within a couple of 100 meters, and they're not, because there's a massive lack of artillery ammo. And part of why Russia is still able to grind out these advances is because Ukraine is still lacking artillery ammo, even though the Czech initiative is getting stuff there. This is a long front line, right? And when you've opened up the front line even further in the Kharkiv area, where you've got two more sectors and there was that third one as well, then that increases the artillery ammunition you are going to need every day in order to defend against attacks there. So an extended front line, they just need way more ammo, and they are getting more ammo, but they always will need more. Well, Bulgaria has found excess ammunition, which is ready to transfer to Ukraine, according to the Minister of Defense of Bulgaria. He noted that government must first decide on the transfer and then arrange the logistics. Then we've got almost all Slovak ammunition production this year has already been ordered for Ukraine, according to Bloomberg. So this year, Slovakia is expected to produce 125,000 shells, and already next year, 200,000 shells, and they're pretty much going to Ukraine. Now, of course, you've had Robert Fico from the government saying Ukraine suck and we're not really supporting Ukraine. We're not going to give any military assistance to Ukraine, but you can buy it off us, which I've already explained many times before is complete and ethical double standards. You can't say, I think this is bad, what you are doing is bad, but if you pay me some money, then that makes it okay. Then you've really got sort of moral double standards, unless you have some weird version of consequentialism where that money gets put to good that overrides that bad, etc. But in very simple terms, that is moral double standards. it's just odd that they do that, but they are doing this, and they're still allowing their own defense manufacturing industry to supply Ukraine for money, even though they politically and thus morally disagree with helping Ukraine militarily. So Bloomberg again, Slovakia is arming Ukraine even though it doesn't want to. Despite the Slovak government's pledge that they won't provide military aid to Ukraine, commercial contracts for ammunition are still pumping out shells. Pre-2022, Slovakia was producing just 20,000 155mm shells annually. This year, they're expected to produce 125,000. Next year, 200,000. So that's incredible. His predecessor, Yaroslav Nad, had said that last year that virtually all of Slovakia's production, both for that year and the next 3, was already booked for Ukraine. Incredible. The Canadian Armed Forces are training Ukrainian soldiers through simulated combat scenarios as part of Operation Unifier, and a multinational Interflex training mission in the UK to ensure that they are prepared to face the Russian army. So Canada is again another one of the nations helping to train these guys in the UK. There you go. So those guys are, I presume, being trained in the UK. I know a UK pavement, and that looks like a UK pavement equipped with weeds that haven't been cleared up by the council yet. So yeah, it definitely tracks with UK Interflex. So lots of nations are helping out the UK in their training in Operation Interflex. Canadians are continuing to do so. Now, about 3,800 prisoners have already started serving in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Roman Kostenko, Secretary of the Committee of National Security, Defense and Intelligence, has said 3,800 prisoners already in the AFU. Most of them have recently completed their training, but among them are already wounded and dead. So we know that they have been already serving down in the Cross direction. I think he estimated the army will manage to recruit about 5,000 prisoners in total. So there've been these differing numbers. Some originally were a lot higher than that, but I guess you've got to make sure you've got people who are fit enough and who are right enough to be able to take out a prison to allow them to serve in the armed forces. So 5,000 in total, which is, definitely useful, better than 0,000. Ukraine is discussing with Moldova the return of Ukrainian men of conscription age who left the country illegally to Moldova. Ukrainian ambassador to Moldova, Shevchenko, mentioned that Kyiv is having a certain dialogue with Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, on this matter. We know that a number of people have perished. A number of Ukrainians have perished crossing rivers to Romania, Moldova. It is one of the favoured exit routes for people who are trying to dodge the draft there. Now, Ukrainian analysis has revealed that Russian technology has been found in North Korean missiles used against Ukraine. Experts found Russian steel, tungsten alloy, and design elements in KN-23 missiles. Cooperation spans decades. Hwasong-10 is a modified Soviet nuclear ballistic R-27 missile. So unsurprising, but I wonder what that means in terms of UN Security Council and UN sanctions. Who knows? Russia appear to be able to do what the frickin' hell they want. New UK Defence Secretary John Healey, speaking at Roissy Royal United Services Institute LWC24, so a conference, says he wants to reduce partisan politics in security policy, quote, because no political party has a monopoly on defence or pride in our military, end quote. Says he's offered Shadow Defence Secretary the access to intelligence briefings. Now, this isn't anything particularly new. It's been done more, I think, on an ad hoc basis previously, or depending on what the issues were. But I like this idea as long as it's done as securely as possible in terms of leakage of information. This is really good. So bipartisan support for bipartisan involvement in military matters means that when it comes to something like, oh my goodness, we're at war with, say, the Russians in Ukraine, or we're supporting Ukraine, then you don't have a bipartisan approach to support like you would get, even though there are bipartisan intelligence groups in committees in the US. The idea is you don't get a US situation whereby it's falling along bipartisan lines. And it's about the UK in this case being trying to work together with political opposition to make sure the end result is good for the nation, not just for the political party. And actually, we've had that with the conflict in Ukraine. Luckily, we've had that bipartisan support throughout, the previous Conservative government. So anyway, John Healey said that's why the Strategic Defence Review, so this big review that's taking place over into 2025, will welcome contributions from other political parties and from across the defence community, because I want to forge Britain's defence strategy, not just the defence strategy for this new Labour government. This is really good. I am increasingly a fan of the Labour government. Not 100%. There are certain areas where I'm like, but in stuff like this foreign policy, and I've been impressed with their approach and their competence, and their wanting to take this job really super seriously. These aren't just big performative announcements. They're not performative policies even. These are sensible, serious people trying to achieve sensible and serious things in government. Healey, with a pointed message for the army audience: as this world becomes more dangerous, the principle of one defence also becomes increasingly more important. The days when we could indulge in inter-service rivalry are over. We must be fit to fight, not fight among ourselves. So there's always a play-off between the different elements of the armed services in terms of what support they get, etc., etc. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that one in there because this is potentially an issue across many countries. Is how do you foster a sense of bipartisan or cross-parliamentary support for doing the right thing for the country, not just seemingly doing something as a political party rather than as a nation. And that's really important. And then this interesting from Shashnik Joshi again: the presence of UAE's Mirage 2000s in China raises the issue of Chinese access to Western military aircraft. Also, whether you notice that this type of aircraft is operated by the Taiwanese Air Force. Being the host nation offers China the ability of bringing other assets to bear overtly or covertly. AEW aircraft could be used to monitor the exercise, potentially providing further insights into the ability of Chinese AEW radar to detect the UAE's Mirage 2000. So the French are going to be, surely they're going to be pissed at this. So the UAE have gone over to do some kind of military training exercise with the Chinese, but they've taken Western aircraft here, Mirage 2000s, and China are surely going to be like, thank you very much. Okay, they're not like the crazy newest plane, but we are going to have a look at them in the cold, not the cold light of day, maybe the cold dark of night. We'll have a look around these, and then when we get them up in the air, we'll understand how they operate under these radar conditions and these radar conditions. This is not good news, and hopefully the UAE get a bloody great rap on the knuckles for this. Goodness me. I'm sure the French, and I'm sure Dassault, the manufacturing company, will be super, super annoyed. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was of use, of interest to you in your daily updates for the Ukrainian war, or the war in Ukraine. I'll now get on with my geopolitics video, which will be a pretty chock-a-block.